Welcome to the Scalable Real Estate Investing Podcast, where we discuss the most scalable strategies, tools, and approaches to successfully invest in real estate. Learn how to make the most impact of your time, automate your real estate investing business, find off-market deals with minimum time invested, and leverage your capital to create as many income streams as possible so that you can achieve true financial independence. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Mason Clement. Hi, Scalable Investors. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to tell you about a group that I'm a part of called HiveMind. If you're serious about taking the next step in your real estate investing career, then this is definitely a group that you need to join. Some of our members are making $90,000 or more per month and as much as $300,000 on just one deal. And at the same time, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars like you typically would joining other mastermind groups. This is only $99 per month. And when you join, you'll gain access to a robust integrated CRM software that allows you to track your leads, run automated triggers, and ultimately scale your marketing efforts. So the difference here is that you're not left high and dry, but gain access to a support network that allows you to use that tool and learn from other more experienced real estate investors. So to learn more, go to scalablerei.com/HiveMind. That's HIVEMIND. Thanks a lot. Let's get into the episode. Hi, Scalable Investors. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Scalable Real Estate Investing. I'm your host, Mason Clement, and today we have with us Nicoletti, who is a legend in all things probate in Florida. If you haven't heard of him yet, you are about to be brought up to speed and enlightened about anything that has to do with probate, especially on any real estate deal. He primarily works with real estate investors. I think having him on the show is going to be really helpful in just bringing us up to speed on different legal aspects that we should be aware of, and also deals that are sometimes hard to do that other investors might pass on that you could actually unlock value in by working with Al. So Al, let's just jump into things. How are you doing today? What's going on?
Mason, thanks so much for having me on your show. I'm honored to be on your podcast. This is great. Any value I can provide to your guests, I'll be that resource. We'll dive in on the topics and we'll just go from there.
All right, perfect. Sounds good. So why don't we just take a step back? I'd like to get some background on the different guests we have on the show. What made you want to do law, and how did you eventually get into this probate niche with real estate investors?
Yeah, if I told you the story, we'd be on for like 15, 20 minutes. I'll give you the really short version. I actually have a music background. That's why I have the violin back there on my shelf. I'm naturally a musician, was for 15 years, went to school for it. And realized that music wasn't going to be like the thing that made money. I loved it. It was fun. We were always doing gigs and everything. And somehow I needed to figure out in college, like what my next direction was. And naturally it was, hey, maybe I'll just be a lawyer, right? Know how to take my skills and my speaking skills, and I can think on my feet and take my music background. Maybe I'll do entertainment law. So got into law. I had no idea what I was getting into, taking all those classes. And I think it was by my third year when I was taking the bar exam, when I was studying for it, I was like, I really liked real estate. I was like really liking the real property side to things. So when I eventually had passed, took a job in Miami, was doing foreclosure defense work. And eventually I was finding myself in the foreclosure world, but also dabbling a little bit in the probate world. And I had a best friend of mine from law school that was doing probate back when he was in law school, took a job. And he visited me one day, and this is pretty much what planted the seed that has now gone 400 miles an hour speeding through Florida, which is, did I realize at the time how many properties are just sitting out there where there's never been a probate. Somebody owned the property, they died, now they want to sell, or they got to sell it. It's dilapidated. It's a vacant house. It needs rehab, and now the heirs don't want to deal with it. And how many there are out there, and how many of them have gone to lawyers that, charge up front where we could wait until the closing. So at the time I didn't get it. And then a year later went by, he came back to visit and he said, well, what were your findings? And I was like, I still don't get it. And about like 2 or 3 months after that, Mason, a light bulb went off. And I said, wait a second, you're talking about thousands of properties that have these problems, these issues that people need to try to get through to get their property sold so they make the money. And then you have investors and realtors that are trying to either list it or buy it, and you can't get to that next step. It was like a thing right in the middle. It was like a wall. And I realized that was an opportunity to help be a problem solver for those issues. So I really got in the niche then. And then from there, once I did a few of them, I took a job in Jacksonville, did a few of the probates. And when I realized how fast I could do them, how efficiently I could do them, I just started speaking about it, powering through it, and it took off from there, and it's exploded. I mean, absolutely exploded.
Okay. So for someone who's not really familiar with probate, like what is it and why is it necessary? And you just hit on it a little bit that you do it quickly. So how long does it usually take, and how long does it take the Al Nicoletti way?
The what, the why, the how long, right? And how much, right? It was always the question. So big picture. So I'm an attorney here in Florida. So the way the Florida world works with probate is like somebody owned real estate. It could even be a bank account, a brokerage account, but somebody owned an asset. When they own the asset, they died. And now in order for the heirs to either keep the property or sell the property, there needs to be a court process called probate. And probate is moving the title from the deceased to the heirs. So now they can sell and transfer and do whatever they want with the property. It's that simple. It's moving the title over. Now, the why is title insurance. Title insurance doesn't want to take risk on an heir ever coming back and trying to make a claim to the property, right? So they want to ensure that all the heirs are determined, right? That's what they call it, determining the heirs, and that at closing, those heirs deed out to the new buyer or to the new person that's buying it. So now they've canceled out their interest. Their interest is now transferred over formally. So title insurance is the big why. They don't want to take the risk. They want to make sure they have that all packaged and wrapped up. Then you have the how long. How long really depends on what's going on with the kind of probate. The Al Nicoletti way is when they're that simple and there's mom died, 4 kids, 5 kids, and they all are in agreement, then the next thing you know, we can get that thing done in like a matter of weeks, a month, 2 months, whatever it is. So that's the big picture about what's going on.
Okay, and I imagine that I need to have some margin built into my deal to be able to pay for that probate. So what's that typical cost? And I imagine it depends on each probate, but ballpark figures.
Yeah, you could be looking at like 2,500, 3,000 for just a simple probate, just something simple going on. It always depends on what's happening though, Mason, because like if you have something that's bigger, you have a bigger kind of probate than that. You have something that's bigger asset or land, or the value's really high. You're talking about the price can really vary per probate. It really varies, but the big thing that a lot of people are drawn to is the timing. That if you knew you could get these things done in a matter of weeks, month, 2 months, you would do it. I mean, people would say, hey, we're lining up at the door to do this kind of stuff. Simple.
Okay. Got it. That makes sense. And I know that you work with a lot of land investors, and I assume single family house investors. What's the allocation look like between those two different asset classes?
Between the which ones, Mason?
I just wonder how many of your clients are typically trying to work on a house versus a vacant piece of land for your client mix?
You know what? It's interesting. I think that number has gone up tremendously on the land side lately. And I think there's different groups of investors. And in the last year, I've been really fortunate to connect with a lot of the land investors. You know, they have their own group with the land side of things, like the Hive Mind, right? Love the Hive, because the Hive, they focus on a lot of land too, not just real estate, but land. So I would say what went from 90-10, 90% single family, 10% land, has kind of gone up from like 60%, 60% residential, 40% land. I think it's kind of almost gone half and half, because I think what's going on is a lot of people are realizing that there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of lots. People are moving to Florida. People want to buy property, but you can't buy. If you want to move to Florida, you got to have a house, but can't have a house unless you have somebody that's able to sell you the land so you can build on it. And a lot of people have realized that in like the Port Charlotte area, the Lehigh Acres area, a lot of the other great counties like Putnam County, Marion County, great counties with land. I think a lot of people have figured out that it's important. So I love the land side to things too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so there's probate, but then there's also quiet title, which I've had to consider doing on some of my deals. Could you get into that and like how they compare to each other? How would I differentiate?
So while probate can be fast, efficient, and quick, quiet title is probably the exact opposite. It could take long, it's not inexpensive, and there's a lot more to it. So what quiet title is a lawsuit that it can be used to try to extinguish and cancel out issues and clouds in the back chain of title. It's not to try to cancel out somebody's interest that's on title now, but if you picked it up, Mason, from let's say a quit claim deed, and that person picked it up from a quit claim deed, now you're trying to sell the property to me. We go under contract. We bring the contract to the title company. Title company comes back with a commitment, with title insurance commitments, and it says, hey, there's judgments from 10 years ago, 15 years ago on that property. There's 3 probates that need to be cleared up. There's still an outstanding issue, maybe another lien that we didn't know about on the property. So you're thinking, well, what do we do? And the mechanism that we could do, if title insurance approves it is the key word, is doing the quiet title lawsuit, where we file a lawsuit. Somebody retains me, whoever that owner is, somebody retains me. We prepare a complaint, we file the complaint, we serve everybody and anybody that may have an interest, heirs, estates, lien holders, judgment holders that may have an interest. We serve them, and after a period of time, we then what we call default out, wipe them out. So then eventually we get a judgment. That judgment gets recorded so you can bring that back to the title company. Basically, it's a mechanism to try to get clear, marketable title. It's just expensive and long. And as long as you have those expectations of that, if the deal makes sense, great. I don't think it's a thing for land investors. I think the numbers are too tight on land investors. You would ask me that 2 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, man, let's do it. Quiet title. It's like, no way, not what the things that I've seen. I have one right now where a really good example. This is a great story. And I'm in the middle of it right now. So lady was like a caretaker for this family for many years. And the house had been in the family for many years. Well, there was like a deed chain that was going on from like the 90s in the early 2000s. Actually, it really started from the 2000s on. And the last deed that was done was from this trust. This trustee, a trust, deceased. It was the way it was weird. Well, they deeded it to the caretaker. And they wanted her to have the property. I never heard of anything of undue influence or anything like that. They really wanted her to have the property, according to the family. They think they tried it twice. So she owned it from like 2014, and eventually a buyer came along and said, we want to buy the property from you. So she said, great, I'm ready to sell the property. You're talking about like a $300,000 piece of property, not land, right? No mortgage. Tons of equity, right? So they said they wanted to buy it from her. They offered their price. They bring it to the title company, And the title company comes back and says, well, first of all, you got to get the tenant out. There was a tenant on the property. Well, she was living there. So first we had to get the tenant out. But the second thing we had to do, the title work came back and said, hey, you need to get deeds from the trust. And we were thinking, why do we need to get deeds from the trust? Like, what was the problem? Well, the title insurance said how it was deeded to her was not a proper way of it being deeded. So in order for her to have cleared up that issue, she would need to go back to that trustee to try to get a brand new deed. Well, here's the dilemma. Nobody knows where the trust is, and everybody pretty much is dead. So how do you even deal with that? Like, how do you get to that next step? Well, you can't. My preference would be to do, obviously probate would be number one, but you can't do probate on this. Number two would be to do a trust administration. That'd be so much easier. That's almost like probate, but it's not probate. But the last option was quiet title. But here was the big thing. She had only been there at the time for 6 years. And we'll talk about this later in your episode, but there's something called adverse possession. The one thing I wanted to make sure of is that she hit the 7-year mark on a deed so that she has a strong position when she brings a lawsuit to say, hey, I've been here for 7 years. I've lived and resided in the property. When I quiet the title to the property, I want to have superior ownership to it. So we had to wait to the 7-year mark. And I literally just filed it like the other day. And when I did it, you're thinking, oh, that's great. But the thing that you all don't see is, well, who did you serve? 24 people. We had to go back to all the people that were on the certificate of trust. We had to name everybody, find all of their heirs, and it ends up being 24. And I've learned through experience, Mason, because when you get with quiet titles, you want to find everything up front. You want to, because they take so long, you want to find everything up front. 24 people. We're in the process of serving everybody. If nobody comes back or people are dead, we'll do a newspaper publication and let's wrap it up. It's crazy. You're talking about 15, 20 grand too.
Okay. Got it. I can see that though. If there's huge equity, no mortgage, it could be worth it. All right. That's a very helpful example. It reminds me a lot of the movie with Daniel Craig. I think it's called Knives Out. You see that movie?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. It's very funny. Like, I guess it doesn't ruin and spoil the whole thing. Like once you're in it, like a few minutes, you kind of see the whole debacle there. It's pretty funny, but basically deeding a house to a caretaker. But yeah, anyway, not to get too off track about movie debates and stuff like that. So why don't we go into that a little bit more? I like that adverse possession that you just hit on. What is that, and like why should I know about it? And does that 7-year timeline vary by state?
Yeah, it varies by state. It's not, I don't know what Texas is. I think John Alexander was talking about that on a Clubhouse chat one time. It's great stuff. And if you see, John's book is up on my shelf, the title search one, the do-it-yourself real estate title search. So connect with John. John was talking about that for Texas, but Florida, it's 7 years. But here's the thing. Adverse possession, there's two types. There's color of title and there's without color of title. Color of title means you're on a deed, a judgment, or a court order. You're on it. Your name is on it. And you've had that title, in good faith, you've had that title for 7 years or more. If you have that alone, and then you have issues in the title chain, that's when you bring the adverse possession, the quiet title lawsuit, sue, and then try to make that claim that you have that superior title to the property. But then the other one is without color of title, meaning you are not on a deed. You're not on a order or judgment. You've been in the property. You've been maintaining it. You've been cultivating it. You've been improving it, and you've been paying the taxes for 7 years continuously. You've been, that they call being an actual possession. You've either enclosed it or substantially improved it. And in Florida, there's actually an additional step that you have to file this DR, this tax Department of Revenue form. And the revenue form, you have to do it like every 7 years, 30 days after, or within 30 days after paying the taxes. A lot of people miss that step. It's crazy. So what's the big picture for investors? When it comes to adverse possession, I don't see it too often, but a lot of people, a lot of investors that like will say, hey, I found this property, the seller wants to sell. And I'll say, okay, great. Well, they don't have real title to the property, but they've been paying the taxes for 15 years. Okay. Do they meet 1, 2, and 3? Not really. It's hard to you have to have all the requirements. But like the one I was just talking about, she's been on the deed. She's been on that deed for 7 years. She's lived there continuously, substantially enclosed it. With Florida, when you're on a deed or a judgment in order, you don't have to prove payment of property taxes, but she's been on the deed. She's been living there, residing there. So it's a really interesting concept when it comes up. I just don't see it come up too much. The thing that comes up more is like legal description errors, or the wild deed case that I had. That was wild. That was a crazy case. I think I've talked about it on Clubhouse a little bit, but that's where we could dive in. I'll let you, if we go that route, we'll talk about the wild deed.
Okay. Yeah. I'm all for it. I think just to wrap up on the adverse possession thing, I think what I've encountered a lot of times is there's a husband or a wife, a spouse, and then the other spouse is deceased or they're divorced or something. So they own 50%, but they want me to pay them 100% of the sale proceeds for a 50% interest. And they don't really want to acknowledge that the estate of the deceased spouse actually owns that 50%. And so that's one of the concepts as well. I could purchase a 50% and then wait around 7 years and get the adverse possession for the remaining 50%. But then it starts to become like, do I really want to wait around 7 years for a deal to work? Stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I don't see it come up as much as you think. Give me about 10 to 15 years, and I'll probably have like 3 or 4 stories for you on it. I'm sure that'll come up, but I don't see it come up as much as you probably think. Again, this one that came up was really unique. We had one where the legal description was a little off on a little tract of land, and on the little tract of land, we're able to say, hey, we got to fix the legal description, and at the same time, we want to make sure that it's known that they've had title to that property for that long. So I've rarely seen it come up as much as you probably think.
Okay. But one other thing too, though, I did keep in mind, there's just one guy who wanted to sell me his lot in San Antonio. And I looked at it on Google Street View, and it was just a few months back, dated like March 2021 or something. And I told him, like, no, someone like extended their house and they have it sitting right on top of your lot. I'm not going to buy that because that's extreme risk of adverse possession. He's like, well, I haven't gone there in 10 years, so I don't know what's going on there. I was like, yeah, I know that's a huge problem because it's been well past any time frame that most states would probably require for adverse possession. So that's another example of how it comes up on deals where you have to just be aware, like, well, yeah, if I get this under contract, could someone actually buy it without having issues? But why don't we go into that wild deed? Was that the one you're just talking about, or is this a whole nother deal?
Whole nother deal. Investor came across a piece of property. They were doing their driving for dollars. I think it was like either a code violation or something. And he went to the door, he knocked on the door, and there were people inside. And when he asked, like, hey, I'm interested in buying the house, they said, we're not the owners. And he said, well, who are you? They said, we're tenants. And he was looking at his paper that he had all the information on, and there was a lady's name on the paper. And he asked him, he said, who's the owner? And the tenant said, it's this guy. And he was like, this guy, that's not the name that's on the paper that I have. And they said, we don't even know who that is. So he like, at that point, the red flag went up. He's like, what's going on here? So he did a little research. He found the number of this guy, the so-called landlord guy, and talked to him and said, like, who are you? What are you? What's going on here? And he said, he was the landlord for this property. I'm not interested in selling the property. And the investor said, how can you be the landlord when you're not even the true owner of the property? Like, you're not even on the, like, that's not what's here. And that's when the guy hung up and stopped talking to the investor. So this is not the type of investor that's like, all right, next deal. Like, he kept digging. He kept going into it. Come to find out, when he did some digging and pulled title, there was a lady that owned the property. She had just moved out of the state. She had just moved to another state in the US. And he reached out to her and he said, "Ma'am, I'm interested in buying your property." And she said, "Oh, great. I just left. I don't, I want to kind of liquidate it. I don't want to deal with it anymore." And he said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to buy it, but there's one problem. You have tenants in the property." And she was like, "What? We have tenants in the property?" She couldn't believe that there were people in the property. She said, "What are you talking about? I don't know who those people are. I left. It's vacant." He said, "Yeah. And there's apparently some guy that's renting it out." She couldn't believe it. So he said, let me look up something. So he goes to the title company. He pulls the title from the title company. Title company commitment comes back and says, quit claim deed, warranty deed, order of summary administration, there's probate, wild deed. And we were like, "What's a wild deed?" And so he asked us, and we looked at, did some research, and we found out a wild deed is a deed totally not connected to the true chain of title. It's a randomly out of the blue recorded deed. So this guy prepared a deed with another guy, random deed, made it look like a deed, smelled like a deed, tasted like a deed, recorded the deed, and the recording office can't do anything about it if it has that look and appearance, and recorded against the property to try to get title to the property. So the investor goes back to the lady, says, "I have an idea. I know what we could do. We're going to quiet the title to the property. I know who you can get in touch with and reach out to." She reaches out to us. We prepare the lawsuit. We try to serve this guy. It was like a squirrel. It kept squirreling. We tried every major city where we thought this guy was, because we were going to wipe him out through a newspaper publication. We couldn't find him. We did a summary judgment motion. The day of the hearing, that same day, we were about to wipe him out completely. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer showed up. And we were just like, what could you possibly argue as a valid point to you being the true title holder? And he was like, "Well, no, we're just gonna walk away from this." And you know what? It all worked out. We got the judgment. She ended up being the true title holder. He was able to buy the property and out. Bottom line, there's weird stuff out there. Forget the tax deeds and all that stuff, quiet title. There's weird stuff out there. And you should always try to explore what your options are first and see what's happening, how much, how long. If the deal's tight, it's not going to happen. But you should always explore that option first before you say no to it. But just be open-minded that it may not be able to work. But I'll say this to your listeners, Mason. It is why I love probate, because probate can be a very simple solution to a big problem and a big mess. Not with the wild deed per se, but with a lot of other title issues that come up in Florida. Probate could be the big answer when somebody's deceased, instead of going through these monstrosity lawsuits, these big things where you're going to be spending tons and tons of money on it and taking forever. That's why I love the probate niche.
Okay, perfect. But I think that probate, I know in Texas you can do an affidavit of heirship in lieu of probate, so it's not always required. It depends on the state, right?
Yeah, Florida, you need it. Florida, yeah. It's gonna have to happen, right? So Florida is going to be a big thing for it. But yeah, I've heard Texas, you can have that affidavit if everybody agrees. I've heard even North Carolina has been in is one where I've heard that if it's been more than 2 years from date of death, that you could do the affidavit of heirship. In Florida, it could be 30, 40 years. You're not getting away with it. But again, for your listeners, probate can take a matter of weeks, a month, 2 months. And what I'm able to do, Mason, is I wait until closing to get paid, and we get it done efficiently and quickly.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I know that I've spoken with some sellers where they have a will, but they never probated that will. And at least in Texas, you need to probate it within 4 years from the date of death. So is there any time frame like that for Florida?
No, that's what's so crazy. There's none of that. There's no There's no time frame on anything. It could be 30 years ago. The probate's never been done. The will was done 25. Oh no, it's got to be more than 30 years ago. The will was done many, many years ago before that, and there's still property sitting there. You're talking about it's still got to be done. Like, I mean, that's why it gets confusing. We have a probate right now. It's 6 probates in South Florida. This family had it for years, and it goes back to the 50s and 40s. Guy owned it, basically owns it 50%. The other side of the family owns the other 50%, divided in 4 ways. It's so crazy. I mean, you're talking about six probates from the 50s, 70s, 90s. Still got to be done. No will, but still has to be done.
Okay, got it. That's definitely helpful to understand that. Oh yeah, another nuance I learned from Florida is the deeds need to be signed by a witness. Is it 1 witness or 2 witnesses?
Are you talking about for deeds in Florida?
Yeah, to be able to record them.
Yeah, it's 2 witnesses, and the notary can be a witness.
Oh, okay. So then it's just kind of 1 other witness.
I mean, it's really 2, but there's got to be a notary there. That notary can be a witness as well.
Okay, got it. One other thing that I like to hit on before we go is specific performance. And like, this is typically, I know for like the TREC form, Texas Real Estate Commission template, and other state templates they have, in the event of default, seller or buyer can enforce specific performance, which means like if the seller is trying to back out, I can try to hold their feet to the fire and force them to actually sell the property. Could you just get into that a little bit more about like your experience and how likely it is to actually succeed in enforcing that?
So I've never actually seen one go through. I've never actually filed one yet, but it is a very interesting concept where you and a seller are under contract to a property. There's no contingencies, no conditions, let's just say you're pure cash buyer. You're ready to go to closing, or you satisfied the financing requirement because you got approved. You're ready to go to closing. And like right before you go to closing, the seller backs out at the last minute. And Florida has that specific performance that you're able to bring as well, a cause of action to enforce the deal and make the seller sell to you, enforce that contract. Say you're under a real estate contract, you agree to it. We're going to go to closing, and we're going to have somebody sign on your behalf. But in Florida, that contract, no contingencies, no conditions, got to be very clear of who the parties are, the property address, the legal description, what role everybody was in. It's got to be very clear and unambiguous. Those are the legal words, clear and unambiguous. And as a buyer, and even on the side of being the seller, you're ready, willing, and able to close on the deal. That's why I keep going back to you're a cash buyer, no contingencies, you're going to closing. And then they back out at the last minute. You have a strong argument to really get that enforced. At the end of the day, the judge is going to approve or disapprove which way it goes, depending on factors or situations. I couldn't imagine what that would have looked like during the pandemic kind of thing. But, I think that's all going to depend on case by case scenarios. And I can't wait to see that one day, just because I want to see it like go from start to finish, like how that looks. But it is possible to do in Florida. And again, there's got to be room in the deal to do that. It's got to make sense. You're talking about, no mortgage, you're under contract for $150,000 property, seller backs out at the last minute. Yeah, you got room. You're on a land deal where you buy it for $4,000, you're signing it out for $7,000. Super tight numbers. I mean, does that even make sense? What if they contest it? What if it may not even make a lot of sense to even get into that? And it's the world we live in. It can be hard like that, but you got to analyze each one.
Okay. Yeah, and also being on the other side where I'm trying to sell it, I had one recently where they were under contract with us for a month, and I wanted to hold their feet to the fire, at least keep the earnest money, and they just couldn't be approved by their lender because they didn't have 2 years of tax returns. And instead of fixing that problem, they just decided to back out. They asked for me to sell on terms, so I provided my owner financing terms, and they're like, "Oh, that's too egregious." And I was like, "That's what the terms are, though." And then so I even like changed it, and like the wife agreed to it, and then the husband still felt like we are trying to scam them or something. It was just stupid. But I spoke with an attorney I used Legal Shield just as a cheaper $40 per month option, and they were kind of explaining that, yeah, if you take this to court, the judge will probably side with that buyer, a poor buyer. They can't qualify for lending, so therefore they're not ready, willing, and able to close. And that's why I just wanted to circle back to what you mentioned there, because I was like, you know what, it's probably true. I don't want to pay thousands of dollars and they're still not going to be able to close on it, you know?
I think it makes more sense from when the seller backs out versus the buyer backs out, because the seller is the one sitting on the equity. The seller is the one sitting on the property that you're trying to buy. The buyer making, I mean, I'm sure you can, you're able to do it from the buyer's side, but like from my perspective, the thing that makes the most sense is when the seller backs out of the deal at the last minute, because they're sitting on that piece of property to sell.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that we've hit on most major points here. This has been really helpful. Is there anything else you think we're missing that you want to hit on?
Yeah. Probate's the best niche ever.
All right.
I think it's just to hammer it for your viewers. Like, look, when you get in these messy situations from time to time, especially in Florida, I'll make sure I give my contact out to your listeners, Mason. But like, if you run into them, don't shy away from it, especially when you find yourself in that Florida market, because the probates can be easy and simple. They could take weeks, a month or two, maybe a couple months, depending on the county, but you can find great deals with probates. You can find amazing spreads. And even when you get into the quiet titles, the weird stuff, always have it analyzed and see what's going on before you pass it off. I think it's a big, big tip. And again, I love my probate world.
Perfect. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. It's another tool to have in your tool belt so you can maximize these conversions. So totally makes sense. So what is the best way if someone wants to get in touch with you, how to do that?
First, find me all over social media. I'm on Facebook under Al Nicoletti, Instagram at Attorney Nicoletti. You can find my YouTube channel under Al Nicoletti. My podcast is the Al Nicoletti Show, which is every Wednesday live at 8 p.m. But you can find it on iTunes and Spotify. And I think I'm on LinkedIn as well. So you can check me out there. My phone number is 904-999-0053. And my email address is al@Nicoletti, NICOLETTI.com. You can check out my website, www.alnicoletti.com.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to drop all that in the show notes as well. But for all of these diligent listeners, maybe they've already written it down as well. So thanks a lot for coming on the show. I always enjoy talking to you, listening to your stories. I just learn by example. That's the best way to learn, I think. So really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mason. No, thank you for having me. I hope it's value to your listeners, and looking forward to coming out.
All right, perfect. Yeah, we'll do it again soon. Talk to you later.
You got it.
All right, that's another episode of Scalable Real Estate Investing. Thank you for tuning in. Please be sure to leave a review and subscribe on whatever channel you're using to listen or watch these episodes. And also be sure to go to scalablerealestateinvesting.com, scroll to the bottom, and fill out the form to sign up for our email. And you could also reach me directly at mason@scalablerealestateinvesting.com. That's MASON at scalablerealestateinvesting.com. If you'd like to get in touch with me to either partner on deals or even be considered to do your own episode on this podcast. Thanks again, and have a great day.